Queen's Post Podcast, bringing Queens to you.
Hi, Christian Murray here, publisher of the Queen's Post. I'm putting together a series of podcasts in upcoming weeks looking at small businesses here in Queens and how they're doing to get back on their feet. Most have been shut down since March 17th when the Mayor ordered bars and restaurants to close given the spread of COVID-19. Now it's looking as though the economy is probably going to open in the next month or so. And I want to look at how these businesses are going to fare. Now today I'm going to be talking to Tom Grech, President of the Chamber of Commerce here in Queens. Now Tom's told me that he believes that 3,000 of the 6,000 bars and restaurants may not reopen when the economy resumes. We talk about some of the federal programs that the government's offered, the Payment Protection Program, the Economic Injury Disaster Program, both of which have not really helped our small businesses. What we're finding is that small businesses are basically being left to fend for themselves. Now that is very, very frightening given the fact that Queens is based on the charm of its small businesses. We've dealt with a lot of deaths, and as awful as that is, we're now starting to look at the economic carnage that's been created from that. And Tom, I just wanted to ask you, how many businesses do you think are not going to make it in Queens?
Christian, you described it well, and also thank you for having me. I truly appreciate it. Carnage is the right word. There's about 45,000 businesses listed as businesses in Queens County. Some of those are single practitioners, LLCs, and so on, but there's still tens of thousands of businesses in Queens County. Of those, 6,000 are restaurants. And it's been estimated by some, the numbers I'm hearing, that up to 50% may never reopen again. It's not anecdotal, just experiences and conversations from landlords, food suppliers, restaurants themselves. So it's really a tough situation, and we look forward to trying to rebuild everything. If half of those 6,000 are never going to reopen, I want to make sure that those that do reopen have all the resources available, and then try to continue to help those who might be stuck and unable to reopen either repurpose themselves or get their employees new jobs and so on.
So Tom, why do you think the numbers are so high? I mean, obviously we know the overhead, the ongoing rent, is very tough for these businesses. No revenue, 6-7 weeks. It's probably going to be 10-12 weeks. Who knows? Why do you think the numbers are that high? Is it just they can't handle the costs?
I think it's part of it's the costs, but the governor's been like must-see TV for the last couple of weeks with his daily briefings. He talks about it that will not be a light switch to turn us off. I'm sorry, to turn us back on again. Yeah. But in fact, there was a light switch. You mentioned March 16th. There was basically a light switch that turned us off. So I think the sudden, abrupt, and by the way, necessary things that we had to do as a city and a state make it really, really difficult for people to kind of truly understand and grasp the effects of that just abrupt stop. We at the Chamber helped put together a website called Queen's Best that highlighted, my team put it together like in 36 hours, that highlighted all the restaurants in Queens County that were doing takeout. And that had like 6,000 hits within a couple days. People were going there. But if you own a restaurant, the takeout component is nice if you're used to doing takeout, but the seating is a key part of it, as is the alcohol sales, the beer and the wine and the drinks for a cocktail. I think if you were only able to open up for the dinner hours from, say, 4 to 8, that just wasn't enough, I think, to justify many of those places from staying open, unfortunately.
But why do you think they won't reopen, just generally? Are some of these businesses already telling you now, listen, we're not coming back, that's it, game over?
Yeah, the feeling with some of them is, some of the ones that have been around for a long time, it's going to take a lot of effort. It's like doing a startup from scratch. You got to rebuild your customer base. You got to go out and hire people. There's no guarantee those employees are going to come back. You're kind of going at square, except for having the infrastructure of a kitchen and a facility. You're kind of going back to square one. Not to mention the fact that lots of restaurants, people don't seem to think people think they do really, really well, right? That guy is killing it. That woman's bar or restaurant's doing great. The margins are pretty thin. For the most part, it's less than 5%. So if you're out of business for a couple of months, your bills, for the most part, did not go away. You're still going to carry your insurance, your liability insurance. You still have rent due unless you go work some out with your landlord. People have debts. So it's a really tough environment.
So, Tom, you've obviously got two things that these businesses have to, deal with right now. They've either got the cash in the bank to, go for 2, 3, 4 months with limited revenue, or they're basically going to have to borrow money. Are businesses like bars and restaurants, are they prepared to borrow? Or are they saying, well, I don't want to borrow because the chances of me surviving anyway are 50-50. Why do I want to go into debt because of that? Or do some of the more established places also just have cash on hand to ride them through? Where do you think
most people in the restaurant business, and by the way, even in good times, folks will tell you that restaurants have one of the largest failure rates of any other business out there. Everybody thinks they can go out and be a chef and a businessman and wrapped up in one, and it rarely happens. I would like to comment, though, because you asked a great question about lending. The whole notion of this PPP, the Payroll Protection Program, is noble and well thought out, I believe. You get a forgivable loan for up to 2.5% of your payroll. It's designed to get people money in their hands to continue to pay people to work in the business as it is. Now, if you have a restaurant and you're still closed, the folks are on the payroll, they're getting paid, and if you do it the right way per the guidelines, it does become forgivable. The execution of that program has been a disaster, and I think there's always fault. I'm not a big believer in blame. I know bankers that are senior executives that are manning the phones and helping folks put in applications. At the same time, a lot of smaller mom and pop restaurants that do not have the expertise. They may not have a CFO on hand or an accountant at their disposal. They put in incomplete and partially filled out applications, and those were rejected. But that was a great source of a so-called loan because it would bring you across, at least for the 2.5 months' time, as a forgivable loan.
But so few businesses got that.
So up until last Friday, I had been, I'm on, as most people are that work in the business field that we are in, I'm on like literally dozens of conference calls, video calls a week. And at the end of every one, I ask folks, has anybody here on this phone call know of anybody or themselves who's applied for the PPP or, in the case of the EIDL program, gotten money in the bank? As of last Thursday, there was not a single chamber member or anybody else I know that had money in the bank. Some folks didn't get an acknowledgement of the application. Some folks got an acknowledgement that we've received it. And the third one was folks got, you've been accepted or you've been approved. But actual money in the bank, there was nobody as of last Thursday night, Friday morning. All of a sudden, those loans in process, those packages in process started yielding results. And a number, not a large number, but a decent number of folks who had the applications in texted and emailed me and said, Tom, I got money in the bank, which was a great win for them. So that's been a challenging environment, all about execution. It just goes to show that this is an unprecedented situation. Unlike 9/11, which really hurt the U.S. and our country as an attack on our country, from a business perspective, it was confined to that one general area. And as the airlines got back up to speed, the business impact kind of subsided, although things changed with security. Hurricane Sandy was limited to certain areas, but this, besides being global at the start, is now nationwide. So everyone's impacted right now, and I think it's a tough environment.
So, Tom, one thing, though, that I have heard is that the PPP program is not that well suited for restaurants. The reason being is, yes, you get 2.5 times your monthly payroll as a forgivable loan. You have to use 3/4 of it for payroll. But it starts the moment you get the money for 8 weeks, that period. Many of these restaurants will not have employees or have a need for those employees at that time. And so therefore, that component really doesn't help them that much. And then second of all, a lot of them are having trouble showing what's on their payroll because they've got their family members working in the business, or they've got all sorts of odd paperwork. So as a result, a lot of these businesses aren't really helped anyway, even if they are fortunate to win the lottery, essentially, of getting the money. So it seems to me as though they're really on their own, right? For 90% of them, it's like, you got to fall back on your own resources. Either you got the cash or you got to borrow through a conventional bank. Is that a fair assessment of where it all stands?
Yeah, somewhat. I also look at it as, many of the people that we've been talking to and advising in preparation for either applying or once it's in is once you got it in, you better do some outreach to your staff that might be furloughed or laid off and say, if I get this, are you coming back, right? Because the loan is predicated on payroll documentation that's submitted for the loan. So it's really incumbent upon the restaurant owner, in the case you're talking about, or the business owner in general, to make sure those folks come back. I think for the most part, people want to get back to work and do their thing. So, but listen, a restaurant's a tough business in good times, and it's a really tough business in bad, and it's proving its case right now.
Right. One other wrinkle as to what's going on right now with the stimulus, is noble and as, understandable, and it makes sense. The federal $600 extra component to the unemployment insurance benefit. In New York State, you can get about $500 regularly through unemployment. Add another $600, that's $1,100 a week. We may be subject to unprecedentedly high unemployment right now, but a lot of people may not want to go back to work for 4 or 5 months. The fear, too, of the coronavirus still being around, that seems to me to be a big impediment for some of these businesses, whether it be getting the payroll protection program or whether it just be generally speaking.
I agree. It's sometimes it's an unintended consequence. I think the effort and the thought was a noble one and a good one. You used the word noble. I think you're right. But, the unintended consequences is I'm getting calls, some of my members, I'm trying to hire people, and with an extra $2,400 a month by the $600 a week kicker, people are not leaving the comfort of their home. It's a crazy conundrum, but it's a fact in many, many cases. It's a 13-week, 2 months and so, 3 months or so of extra pay. But for right now, it's really tough because some businesses, delivery, security, a number of them are hiring right now and can't get good people.
We've focused a lot on bars and restaurants. People obviously see other things. I mean, I'm looking at the brick and mortar stuff mainly. We see the barber shops. We see, some gyms.
Nail salons.
Some gyms that are privately owned, not part of big chains. Other kind of nail salons, I suppose, but other things out there. How do you think they're going to fare?
They're really hurting. I mean, I think it's across the board. There's very, very few that are so-called doing well, right? The ones that are doing or that are busy by necessity, like in the healthcare field, I utilize my local city MD. And by the way, I use the name because they happen to be members of the chamber. You go to the local city MD, the line is out the door. Those folks are being taxed. The workers there are being taxed beyond anything that would be considered normal. But yeah, I mean, that's why I said before, every single facet of our economy and our business has been impacted. So again, I really do hope that when Governor Cuomo and Trump get on the same page and start opening up our country and our state and our city, it's done in a methodical way that we can kind of safely and carefully get back to business as soon as possible.
And Tom, what do you see in 6 months' time, right? If you had a crystal ball, what do you think we're going to see walking down Main Street in many Queens communities, in the commercial districts?
It's interesting you say that. It's really a good question, Christian, because I think about the days, you and I maybe around the same age. I remember the days of flying at a LaGuardia and JFK and some of the smaller planes at LaGuardia. You went in, you showed your ticket, you walked on the tarmac, and there was a ladder that brought you up the stairs to an airplane. There was no security. It's just a change, right? And I think the new normal will be, I'm not going to say social distancing, but today we don't think twice about going through a line at the TSA, subjected to a body search, and getting to the airport 2 hours early. Just to pull up to the gate half an hour before the flight at LaGuardia or JFK. Same thing with this. I saw some interesting layouts and diagrams that a consulting firm put together, how restaurants may have to reconfigure their floor space. Instead of having 20 tables of 4, It might be 10 tables of 4 spread out. Again, ramifications for that, huge. They want bodies in there. They want to turn tables in a restaurant, even in any other marketplace where there's not big aisles. Some places down south, the supermarkets like a Publix are huge. You can drive a car down the aisle of some of those supermarket aisles. In New York, with real estate being so expensive, sometimes it's hard to get 2 carts to pass side by side in an aisle. So I think there's going to be a lot of changes, some that we're going to understand, some that we're going to begrudgingly have to participate in, but there will be changes in our everyday world. And I'm hoping in 6 months that we'll be back to as much as normal can be.
But do you envisage like walking down these streets and seeing half the places closed, like a vacancy rate of like 40%? What sort of vacancy rate do you anticipate in 6 months?
I'd like to think not. I'm a glasses half full person. I think, especially in Queens, Christian, because we're not the home of these mega, gigantic real estate entities. For the most part, there's some big boys that play in Queens right now, right? But for the most part, our landlords are mom and pops as well. Our landlords are second, third generation property owners. They may own a 20, 30 unit building, right? So they're all part of the community. And I think as we go through those, they may have to be forced on the commercial side to cut the rent to get the place occupied. As long as we have that spirit of we can figure this out and we can move forward and people are willing to risk things, let's hope they do. And let's hope that landlords might say, you know what, I'll cut the rent 30, 40, 50% for the first couple of years. There's been a report commissioned by the governor that says we won't get back to pre-COVID levels of revenue and tax revenue till 2023. That seems like eons from now. But in the meantime, it might be our reality with reduced rents, smaller restaurants, what have you.
Okay. Now, Tom, obviously, you know businesses throughout Queens. And are there any areas that you're hearing are going to struggle a little bit more or going to rebound a little bit better? What are we hearing out there in terms of the whole sort of borough landscape? You know,
it's interesting. We're the most diverse place on earth. And I think because of those different nationalities and those different folks, I think some people are more clannish than others in certain parts of Queens County, like other areas, especially in Queens. We have to get the word out. Today, the Chamber speaks in our outreach in about 13 different languages. We're making certain that the folks that may not be just native English speakers are aware of some of the changes that are coming. But I think certain parts of Queens might be slower to adapt and more difficult to convince the importance of, not spreading the COVID. Right. But you've got areas, say, like Long Island City, very high rent areas. Then you've got areas like, say, Steinway Street in Astoria, where I believe you were raised. Yes.
It's had difficulty anyway. And then this is sort of like we talk about a 1-2. This is the 2, so to speak.
Yeah, this is the 2 and the 3, Christian. This is like
yeah.
It's really tough, right? I mean, retail's already under assault. Macy's laid off or furloughed. I'm not sure what the proper term is. It might be furloughed. 140,000 of their employees nationwide. All their physical stores are closed, right? I get the sense, I think Neiman Marcus just declared Chapter 11 bankruptcy. I think you're going to see, before it gets better, stores that were on the bubble, chains that were on the bubble, shut their doors forever. I can't venture to guess who they're going to be. I think Macy's will survive. They're very well run as an organization. And I think they own, if not mistaken, they own most of their stores, so they are the landlord. But the retail landscape is going to change drastically. I want the new normal to also back off a little bit, like when it comes to this. Ordinarily, I went to go visit you. You would have called me. We met for a cup of coffee to discuss business topics of the day. Well, it's nice to see your smiling face on the video in your house, and I'm on the couch. There's something to be said for the in-person piece of the puzzle. And Dr. Fauci's already said that, if it was up to him, people wouldn't shake hands before meeting and greeting. I don't know. I really can't see that. So I'm not a scientist, but I do hope that the smartest folks in the world are all working on either a preventative vaccine and an antidote for this, that it gets done sooner rather than later. Right. But going back to the neighborhoods, Flushing, Long Island City, they're very different.
How do you think Flushing is going to do coming back from this?
You're asking great questions. Earlier today, we had a town hall with the Queens City Council delegation, and among the speakers was Peter Koo. And I reminded him how back on February 13th, Peter Koo, Mayor de Blasio, Speaker Corey Johnson, and a large number of people had an event, a lunch at a restaurant in downtown Flushing, basically saying that Flushing is open for business. And I remarked today in that phone call, it seems like a million years ago. Today, that New World Mall itself, a 3-story mall, an inner city mall, is boarded up and empty. So a place like that, unfortunately, we have some xenophobia in our country and in our world. People are blaming the Chinese. I don't go for that at all. At the end of the day, we're all Americans. It's going to be partnerships. It's going to be people like Peter Koo, our city council member, Peter Tu, who runs the Flushing Chinese Business Association, getting together and working really hard at making sure that people know that Flushing is back open for business. But that place in particular will probably be has been pretty hard hit and will probably be a challenge to recover from quickly.
Yeah, because you take like Forest Hills and Austin Street, right? It's got some big name stores in there, the chains. They're probably going to be doing very differently than, say, the Jackson Heights little, latest immigrant restaurant kind of scenario, where it's largely, newcomers to the United States with little retail shops and restaurants and what have you. Their situation is going to be vastly different. So how do you look at those two areas differently, and what do you expect in terms of, the rebound or whatever you
It's a fair question. I'm going to put on my advocacy hat for a moment, and I hope you allow me to digress a little bit, but it also answers the question. There's been a lot of projects put forth in Queens County, some of which I'd give the thumbs up to, some of which I'd give a lukewarm response to. But there's a number of them. The development down by the water, purely done with private funds. I think the city, we all know, the city and the state are teetering. The MTA is teetering. There's no money for projects unless the ones that have already been committed and bonded for, right? So for the citizens of the city of New York, all the 9 million of us, to turn to the government to think about, at least the local governments, to reinvest projects off the ground, that's going to be tough for a number of years. I think the feds might come through finally with a nationwide infrastructure project. However, on the local level, what I'm talking about is we need to support private developers that are doing things in places like downtown Flushing and other areas where they're bringing private money in to create jobs, construction jobs and long-term jobs. And I'm looking forward to hearing more from our developers once the landscape's a little clearer to say, what do you want to develop in a place like Forest Hills or Flushing or anywhere within Queens County that's going to not involve necessarily government matching funds or government funds, but an opportunity to go in there and use private funds. I want to support those projects because otherwise development to me is probably going to halt in the entire city of New York.
Okay. Let's talk about New York City government for a second. I mean, we talked about the federal programs, the PPP, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan. What has New York City done in terms of programs? I know it had the employee retention program itself, but has it done anything beyond that? And that program provided, 40% of the payroll, but for businesses that have got 5 employees or less. So quite limited. And then some low interest money for those also with very small businesses. Beyond that, has it done anything else? Or does it have anything else that's still in progress? Because I think they may have even stopped that employee retention program. I think that may have finished. Yeah.
Because the damage is so widespread, I think the city can only do so much. I think they're really going to look to the federal government for, I wouldn't call it a bailout, but for some additional funding. But I will say, before COVID and now especially, there's one organization. Everybody loves to bash the city government for whatever reason. There is an organization in there called SPS, Small Business Services. The commissioner there reports right to the mayor. His name is Greg Bishop. Greg is a breath of fresh air. He gets it. He walks the streets. Not only that, but he walks the walk and talks the talk. So half the battle is knowing what people need, right? And knowing the boots on the ground situation. Greg Bishop, I say it once, I'll say it a million times, is uniquely adapted in that position. And thank God we have him, because I was on a call a little while ago at City Council, listening to some testimony, a video testimony, and he's out in front. And so if we have a hope of getting people to understand, especially elected officials, he's obviously an appointed commissioner, but to get elected officials to understand, a guy like Greg Bishop, who supports all 5 boroughs, does a very, very good job. And he understands what we need. So it isn't like I had to go back to square one and say, I think I need this. Listen, everybody always wants more, but he knows the need. And so I'm very fortunate to be to work with him, and I think all the other chambers are as well.
I mean, we have a lot of elected officials, that'll probably go around and say, small businesses, they're the lifeblood of Queens and New York, but they don't always sort of know really what's going on there. They don't always necessarily listen to small businesses in terms of their woes. And I'm sure you're very familiar with that. So do you think they're going to get it? Do you think they're really going to help these small businesses? And do you think they really understand the problems with the loan programs, with the cash flow issues, with the rent problems? Do you think they get that?
It's funny, because I think every elected, from the president down to the dog catcher, talks about the fact that if I hear it one more time, I'm going to choke. Small businesses are the lifeblood of our economy. It's a great soundbite. It's a wonderful soundbite. But at the end of the day, where the rubber meets the road, needs to be in the city council. Those 51 ladies and gentlemen are charged with updating the codes, changing the laws. I feel, for the most part, very comfortable with the 14 electeds from Queens County that represent Queens County. They get it. They generally work together. They all get it, the importance of small business, because I'm in their districts every day. We're the largest geographic borough, with the most single-family homes, a large number of businesses, up until COVID, a booming economy with our airports, Long Island City, Jamaica. Our electeds get it. Now is the time for them to stand up and be counted amongst the other ones, and say, this is the right thing to do for our small businesses. And in fact, they are the lifeblood. Let's not impede them. Let's help them grow and prosper. Take the shackles off. I think our 14 members from the Queens delegation can do that, so ably led by Karen Koslowitz.
What do you want from them? What can the city do? What do you think the city can do to help here?
I don't know who said it back in I think it was the 30s or the 40s. Maybe it was even in the 50s, before our time, thank God. That the business of General Motors is American business. The sense is that let the businesses, unshackle them. Let the entrepreneurial spirit shine through. I'm not saying lawlessness. I'm not saying no rules. But for the most part, build the parameter and let businesses operate. I think today that in New York City, small businesses employ the vast majority of our people by a percentage basis. It's like 26% small businesses. You have government, healthcare, large businesses. But for the most part, we are the leading segment. Unshackle them. Let our small businesses go out and do their thing. All these onerous rules meant to kind of cure the ills, the social ills out there, just cause people to leave. My biggest enemy is not Brooklyn or Manhattan or Staten Island or the Bronx when it comes to business. My joint enemy, their joint enemy together, is South Carolina and Florida. It used to be Connecticut and New Jersey, but they haven't figured things out over there. It's those states that welcome our brain power, our entrepreneurs, that I worry about. And we have got to get the message through to all of our electeds, not just city council folks, that we have to make life easy for them and not more difficult.
See, we seem to be living in an environment where businesses are being demonized a little bit, as though they take advantage of everybody, as though, they're the big bad wolf, so to speak. Do you think, it seems to me as though that's going to have to change I totally agree. That's been the mindset, even down to this whole thing with the triple P. Everybody wanted to bash the banks. And listen, in every industry, there's evildoers. In every industry, there's bad guys. But I can tell you that, places like Bank of America,
TD Bank, who, by the way, did a fantastic job. A large number of banks had this program foisted upon them on like a Friday, and were expected to figure out the rules and regulations over a weekend and then deal with an antiquated SBA system. For the most part, they got the funding in place. They put the applications and so on in. So I'm not about to demonize anybody, but in general, you're right. People demonize business people as if they're bad people, as if they're trying to get over on the people. You ask the average guy or guy or gal on the street about where they shop and what they do. They like their small businesses. Talk about a small business being asked to pay certain fees or whatever it might be. Those business people that own businesses, they consider their employees like their own family. You got 10 employees, you're a business person, you look out for those 10 people that work for you as if they are part of your family. You give them you help support them with their salary, their medical benefits, their retirement. If you have a 401k, you put in for their Social Security like any other employer would. But these folks should be not demonized. These are our everyday heroes, especially in Queens County with the large number of really small mom and pops.
Yeah, I mean, I know business owners that make less than their employees because they feel as though they're responsible. They keep the business going, thinking, oh, shit, I don't want to put everyone out of work.
That's right.
And I think a lot of people don't realize that. And I'm just hopeful that, people start working these things out a little bit. And
people will see a store, be it a restaurant, be it a supplier of some widget or something else, and they're flying off the shelves, or this, before COVID, there's a line up the block for the restaurant. Oh, that guy's killing it. Oh, that woman's doing unbelievably well. The margins, for the most part, are paper thin.
Okay. Commercial real estate market. It's obviously going to take a bit of a hit here. What do you see for the commercial real estate market, especially like small retail and say the commercial districts of, say, a Sunnyside or Landlords on Steinway Street or Landlords on 82nd Street? What do you sort of see for those types of people? And do you see the rents dropping? And
I think it depends upon the type of tenant, right? I'm reading already that there's a bunch of, I wouldn't call them, I don't know, they're just sharp people that are out and about within Queens trying to continue to find that last mile warehouse, those last mile delivery locations for aggregating and putting product to get delivered. So that marketplace has boomed, and I think will continue to boom, maybe even more so because of this COVID thing, where people are asked to buy more stuff online. If you're a pure retail real estate owner, you have challenges in front of you. I think that they're going to probably have to lower the rents, maybe bring in some more pop-up type stores that may not be long-term, but they'll have to gamble a little bit on who some of their tenants are. We talked about the restaurants being challenged. On the other hand, if we learn nothing about the COVID, that the infrastructure for healthcare in Queens is weak and has been weak. We're down 3 hospitals since the last 15 years. Didn't have enough beds, right? Urgent care has taken a big role in this thing. I think if you have a business or a property that's indicative of that, it's a great opportunity to find more of those places. One of our members is Emu Health over in Glendale. They have a one-stop shop type of model for healthcare. They're doing great. If I'm a landlord, I go seek out them, seek out a city MD, and talk to the hospital organizations, because I think big giant operations may have had their day, but smaller regional operations within the borough might do quite well. And I think the landlords and the property owners could do well, not in the short term, but in the mid to near term, find good tenants in those places.
Okay. Just, are these landlords, and are they sort of negotiating with tenants right now? Is there sort of goodwill? Are they coming to terms, or is it acrimonious? How I mean, everyone's sort of fighting for their lives here.
Sure.
So what are you hearing between the landlord-tenant relationship?
So I believe myself and how I operate and how I operate the chamber is that conversation and dialogue is a good thing, and that absolutes are not a good thing, right? I'm hearing talk about there ought to be a rent strike. There's going to be a rent strike May 1st. We don't have money to pay the landlord. We're not paying the rent. For the most part, I'm hearing that from residential. I'm hearing a little bit about it from the commercial, although there's more of an understanding with commercial landlords because their tenants, who are commercial tenants, have not been operating at all. But if you're a residential, and it's just my own opinion, but if you're a residential person and you lost your job and things are tough, to just not pay the rent, I don't think is the right thing. Absolutely and completely, just not pay the rent. I'm going to go on strike. Because at the end of the day, like I mentioned, a lot of our landlords in Queens County are mom and pops. They might own 20, 30 units. Maybe they own a couple hundred, but it's not some big, giant, nameless, faceless organization. My suggestion is go to your landlord, have a conversation. Landlords, reach out to your tenants. I know things are tight, and work on a program and work on a plan. If there's going to be pain, it ought not be a one-way pain descriptive. It ought to be either some shared pain. Maybe the guy's got to cut the rent, off the record, or adjust the lease for a couple of months or 6 months or whatever else, if the person can pay. But to just not pay the rent, the landlords, whether they're commercial or residential, they still have property taxes, right? There's been a little bit of talk about doing a tax abatement or a tax delay or a tax holiday, but the city is broke. So they need the tax revenue, and I get it. It's a tough time for everybody. But there's got to be some common ground, and I think we have to just be smart about it and frankly be decent to each other as landlord tenants, company management, staff, and work together, because this is the kind of stuff that separates us from other countries and other cities in our country. We got to get together. We got to come up with a common plan, and we got to go back and fight on getting back and reclaiming what's ours in New York City.
All right. There's discussion about the cancel rent. There's legislation in Albany right now. I think it's, forgiving rent for a number of months, but then the landlords can sort of work it out with the banks, that sort of thing. What are your thoughts on that?
It seems awfully fuzzy right now, right? It's not exactly what I talked about, which is trying to find some common ground. And I get it. We live in a very litigious society, and people want their money when they want it, but it can't be a zero-sum game. It can't be the tenants don't pay for 90 days and the landlords take it on the chin.
Yeah.
It's just not the right thing to do, because at the end of the day, the landlord doesn't pay the bank, doesn't pay his taxes. Everybody suffers. I just think it's really important that whatever legislation, whether it's in Albany or here in the 5 boroughs, that is the dialogue, so there's some common ground between all parties, so we don't all go broke and crazy in the process.
Okay. And just to wrap up, I mean, if you want to look at the positive, what can come out of this, or how can Queens, in a few months' time, prosper again? What are you telling people? I mean, it sounds to me as though the Chamber's quite active in terms of, you said that 36 hours, you put together a whole platform. What else do you sort of foresee that people can do to help?
First of all, I would say that I have the greatest staff. I have a wonderful bunch of people some have been around the Chamber for a long time. Some are relative newcomers for a couple of years. We're all working from home, but we're all unified. We're calling our members. We're calling the small businesses our everyday heroes. That was supposed to be our theme starting in 2020, the year of the small business. Never has that been more important. So we're working really hard at making sure that that's the number one focus. Collecting for membership is a tough thing right now, right? But we're just calling and doing check-in calls. The first week, we called every single one of our members to make sure that they were okay and what they might have needed. I know I went off track for a second there. Could you just repeat the first part of your question?
Well, what's it going to take for us to rebound as a borough?
So the Chamber's been around since 1911, and I sat and reflected on that in my backyard the other night about the awesome responsibility that is. Since 1911, all the other chambers are founded around the same time. We're over 100 years old. We survived World War I, the flu pandemic, World War II, you name it, 9/11, the Vietnam conflict, the Korean conflict, Hurricane Sandy. My feeling is that we've been tested and tried before as a country and as a state and as a city. And I heard some great words from some people that said, this too shall pass. Most things in life is a beginning, a middle, and an end. I'd like to think that we're somewhere just around the middle, because I'm an optimist. But I do think that things will start opening up slowly but surely, not that light switch. And I really, truly think that New Yorkers and Queens folks in general, Queens is made up of a bunch of hardscrabble people. 75 years ago, it was the Western Europeans, the Irish, the Germans, the Italians, the Polish, you name it, the Slavic countries that built Queens just before World War II and after World War II. And now it's people from Bangladesh and from Honduras and from Guatemala and from you name it. And they're all here for the very, very same thing. They're chasing the American dream. They want better for their families. There's really no place to do it better than here. And I think once we get our act together and we get a little bit of a jump start between the feds, the city, and the state, we're going to do great.
All right, Tom. Well, that's a great note to end it on. And listen, thanks for all your time and thanks for all the sort of great thoughts that you gave today.
Christian, it was my pleasure to be here and an honor to be interviewed by you. So thank you so much for all you're doing and getting the word out. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Tom.
To keep up with all the latest news in Queens, visit thequeenspost.com or visit any of our sister publications: Astoria Post, Sunnyside Post, LIC Post, Jackson Heights Post, Greenpoint Post, Ridgewood Post, and Forest Hills Post.